The road from the capital was 4 days north and east, 4 days through the transition zone where the city's geometry gave way to the frontiers, where the road surfaces changed character and the ambient density of human activity dropped in the specific increments that mapped the kingdom's priorities. He knew the road. He had traveled it in both directions twice now, and both times the direction had mattered more than the distance. Going south the first time, he had been 11 years old and carrying a plan that was 6 weeks old and untested and almost certainly wrong in several ways he had not yet found. Going south the second time, he had been 14, and the plan had been running for 3 years, and he had found most of the ways it was wrong and corrected for most of them. Going north now, he was 16, and the plan had become something more complicated than a plan. Aldrich slept for most of the first afternoon. He slept the way a man slept when he had been holding himself upright for a sustained period and had been given permission to stop, fully, quietly, with a quality of surrender that was also relief. Kael watched the landscape change outside the window and let him. The capital's immediate surroundings were farmland, organized, efficient, the agricultural density that fed a city of 400,000 people. The farms gave way to managed forest as the road climbed, which gave way to the region's rougher topography as it turned northeast, and the frontier hills began to appear at the horizon in the specific way that things appeared when the air was clear and the elevation was enough to see them. By the second day the light had changed, the particular quality of light that existed this far from a major city's collective smoke, which was not cleaner exactly, but was different in composition, carrying different distances, landing on different textures. He wrote for most of the second day. Not the intelligence network cipher, he was not working the succession operation on this coach journey, though the operation continued in his absence through channels designed to function without him. He was writing an analysis. The capital trips inventory, rendered in honest terms, without the performance of optimism that was not warranted, and without the performance of pessimism that was not warranted either. The succession timeline, tighter than comfortable. The king's formal designation window had started at approximately 6 months when the pact formalized in February. It was June. 4 months remained, approximately, before the window closed and designation became crisis rather than opportunity. The 3-component positioning mechanism was in motion: Tauran commercial documentation, capital correspondent, noble council, but in motion and sufficient were different categories. And he was not yet certain the noble council work had reached the stage where it could function without Seraphine's active management. She had said it would. He believed her on the specific grounds that she had not been wrong in her assessments yet, and that she understood the noble council's timescales better than he did. But he believed her as a considered position rather than an assumption. He worked through what he understood about the order's capital presence, which was where his analysis was least satisfying. He could see the shape of it in negatives, the specific places where his information networks had returned less than he expected, the corridors where inquiry arrived at dead ends that were too clean to be organic. Someone had been maintaining those dead ends. The maintenance cost effort. Effort implied investment. Investment implied something worth protecting. He had expected the order's capital footprint to be significant. He had not expected it to be this densely routed through the Church of Light's administrative structure, woven through the fabric of it in the way that a structural element was woven, not attached to the structure, but load-bearing within it. Damien Cross at the graduation ceremony, the more pronounced quality of distance from the Church of Light anchor. He had noted it without addressing it. He had filed it in the correct category, data whose meaning was not yet clear, to be held for the context that would make it legible. He was not going to guess at that meaning from insufficient evidence. He was going to wait until the evidence was sufficient. The barony, what it provided and what it did not. What it provided: income from the iron mine, running at partial capacity deliberately but producing reliably. Income from the trade route, which had been profitable for 2 of the 3 years he had been at the academy and was more profitable now than when it had started. The physical foundation of the Eastern Frontier Compact, which was an information-sharing alliance and not yet a military one, but which gave him standing in the frontier region that no amount of capital intelligence work could replicate, and time, specifically the kind of time that came from not being in the capital's social geometry, not being subject to its surveillance density, not being required to manage his appearance within it. What it did not provide: access to the royal archive, access to the noble council's formal sessions, direct visibility into the succession's capital side progress. These remained Seraphine's domain and would continue to. He wrote the analysis through the afternoon and put it down at dusk, when the light through the coach window changed to the amber register that made the page harder to read without effort. The frontier hills were visible on the horizon, not dramatic, as frontier hills generally weren't, but specific, the silhouette of them that he had grown up looking at from the barony's high ground, unchanged in the way that things made of geology were unchanged. He had not been looking at them for 3 years. The looking now had a quality that was not sentiment exactly, and was not nothing either. He wrote to Seraphine from the second inn, the letter brief and correctly angled. He told her, the timeline analysis put the designation window at 4 months, which was tighter than he preferred and more workable than he feared. The order's capital routing through the Church of Light's administrative structure needed a second read from her angle. He had a hypothesis about the routing pattern that required Noble Council administrative access to test, and he would send the specific inquiry within the week. The graduation speech had moved what it needed to move. He trusted her accounting of the result. He paused, then added one more line. The barony will require 6 weeks to assess properly. I will write with a more complete picture when I have one. This was true. It was also the kind of truth that knew what it was not saying and was at peace with the omission. He sealed it and gave it to the inn's courier service. The third day the road became the frontier road proper, maintained by the baronies rather than the kingdom's road commission, which meant maintained by people who used it rather than administered it. The surface was good where it needed to be good and rougher where it didn't matter. He had traveled it often enough to know which stretches were which and why. Aldrich was more awake on the third day. He talked about the barony in the specific way he talked about things he had been thinking about for a long time and had been waiting for the right occasion to say. The secondary trade route that had opened through House Kettering's permission, which had reduced the main route's load and allowed it to carry higher value goods. The iron mines foreman Reeve Tandal, who had introduced a new shift rotation that had reduced accidents by a third in 2 years. The farming families in the valley, 3 of whom had expanded their holdings this year because the income had been stable enough to justify the investment. He talked about these things with the quality of someone presenting evidence. Not evidence for Kael's benefit. Aldrich wasn't the kind of man who structured conversations for effect. Evidence because he had been watching these things for 3 years, and the watching had produced a picture he wanted to be accurate about. He wanted the accuracy of the picture shared. Kael listened. He asked 3 questions, each of which opened something that the previous hadn't. By the end of the third day, he had the barony's current state in enough detail that the 4th day's arrival would be confirmation rather than discovery. The 4th day, mid-afternoon, the road crested the last rise before the valley and the barony's main house became visible on the ridge above it, the gray stone that had existed on that ridge for 80 years, unchanged in its stoneness. Everything else had changed. He could see it from a distance. The valley floor's pattern of activity was different from what he remembered. More structured. The specific difference between a place that was organized and a place that had been carefully managed over a sustained period. Gareth was at the gate. He was leaning against the stone post on the right side, in the way he had always stood when he was waiting for something without admitting he was waiting for it. Arms crossed. Looking at the road with the peripheral attention of a man who had been doing this for a long time. When the coach stopped, Gareth looked at Kael for a long moment. Not checking whether it was him, he knew, but the specific look of someone taking inventory of what was present and what had changed. He said, "You look the same." Kael stepped down from the coach. He said, 3 years. Gareth said, "Yes." He did not say welcome back or it's good to see you or any of the things that people said at reunions. He stood at the gate and looked at Kael in the way he always had, taking in what was actually there, without adding to it. Kael said, "The valley looks different." Gareth said, "It does." There was a pause that was not uncomfortable. Kael said, "Good." He meant it in the way he meant most things, precisely, and with the full weight of what he was saying, and without any of the things he was not saying. The gate was open behind Gareth. The barony was behind the gate. They went in. He spent the first 2 weeks at the barony looking at things. Not traveling. The barony was not large enough to require travel in the usual sense. He walked. He walked the routes he had walked as a child and had not walked for 3 years. And he looked at what 3 years of careful management from a capital desk had actually produced when it was rendered in stone and soil, and the specific posture of people who had enough to eat. The iron mine was the first thing he went to see. He went at mid-morning on the second day, when the operation was in its working period rather than its administrative one. Reeve Tandal had the directness of someone who had been hired for competence rather than deference, a fact Kael registered as confirmation of the hiring decision he had made through Torrens intermediary 2.5 years ago, on the basis of a description rather than a meeting. Tandal walked him through the operation without inflating what it was or apologizing for what it wasn't. The mine was producing at approximately 40% of its estimated maximum capacity. This was intentional. The estimates were in Kael's own letters to Tandal. They had discussed the reasons at the time. Full production would attract the kind of attention that would require managing, and the barony's current political situation was not one that benefited from attention. 40% was sustainable, defensible, and sufficient. The mine was running at 40% as if it were a design choice, which it was. Tandal showed him the shift rotation records. The accident log for the past 2 years had 3 minor injuries, 1 cut, 1 pulled muscle, 1 brief cave-in of a secondary shaft with no casualties. He compared this against the previous 3 years' records in his memory, 11 injuries, 2 of which had been serious. The improvement was not luck. It was a specific change in how the shifts were structured, and the change had been Tandal's initiative, not his own. He said, "The secondary shaft that collapsed, what did you do with it?" Tandal told him. He had sealed it, shifted the neighboring extraction to compensate, and added a support inspection protocol to the adjacent shafts. All 3 decisions were correct. The third was not obvious, and Tandal had arrived at it through reasoning rather than precedent. Kael said, "Good," in the way he said things he meant. Tandal looked at him with the slightly bemused expression of someone who had been receiving letters from a 16-year-old for 3 years and had formed certain hypotheses about who was actually writing them and was now not entirely certain. The trade route he assessed through the merchant traffic, which was visible from the main road on the approach to the barony and more visible in the valley market that had developed over the past 3 years around the eastern connector. The market was not large. It was the correct size, the size that existed, because the route was useful rather than because anyone had decided to have a market. He counted the stall configurations: 8 permanent, 12 rotating, 2 specialty. The specialty stalls were the interesting data point. Specialty sellers required a customer base that would return consistently enough to support their specific inventory. 2 specialty stalls in a frontier valley market meant the trade route had produced enough stable traffic that someone had judged the investment worth making. He bought something at one of the specialty stalls, a small length of silk cord, precisely measured, from a seller who had traveled a day and a half to be here. He paid fairly. He asked where the seller had heard of the route. The seller told him, from 2 other merchants in the eastern region's seasonal exchange, who had both mentioned it independently. That was the 3rd year of independent mentions, so the route had become the kind of thing that was recommended by people who had used it to people who hadn't yet. He walked back to the main house. He walked through the farming village that had grown in the valley, not grown in buildings exactly, but grown in what the buildings contained and how the people who lived in them moved. There was a specific quality to movement in a place where material stress had been reduced, not happiness, which was more variable than material stress and less legible from the outside. Stability. The looseness in the shoulders that came from not carrying a constant background weight. 2 of the families he passed he knew by name. He had known their names for 3 years, from Aldrich's letters, in the way he knew the names of nodes in a network. Seeing the names made flesh did not change his analysis of what they represented, but added a texture to it that the analysis had lacked. An older woman outside the second-to-last house on the main path recognized him. She said, "The Baron's son. You've come back." She said it with the particular certainty of frontier people who stated things plainly rather than as questions. He said, "Yes." She said, "Your father looks better." She said it as if this were the primary relevant fact, which from her perspective it was. He said, "He does." She looked at him for a moment with the specific assessment of someone who had known Aldrich Ashford for a long time and was calibrating this person against what she had heard. Then she went inside. He continued to the main house. The Eastern Frontier Compact's status he assessed through the correspondence waiting for him, 3 seasons worth of letters from the 4 other baronies in the Compact, which he had forwarded to the barony's address since the Compact's first informal meeting 4 years ago. He read them in order. The alliance was holding. More than holding, it had developed the specific quality of an arrangement that had become habitual, which was more durable than an arrangement that was maintained by active decision. The information sharing had been genuine on all sides. He had confirmed this by checking the information each house had shared against what he independently knew to be true. Information that diverged from known facts was a signal of deliberate omission or miscommunication. And he had received no such signals in 3 years of correspondence. Either all 4 houses were sharing accurate information, or they had coordinated their inaccuracies with a sophistication he had not detected, which was unlikely. The compact was real. He spent the 3rd week watching his father. Not covertly. He walked with Aldrich on the barony's inspection rounds, which Aldrich did every other week, a habit from before Kael's time, the specific practice of a man who believed that a lord who didn't look at his barony was a lord who didn't know what he was governing. The inspection rounds had changed in character. 3 years ago, they had been the rounds of a man cataloging problems. Now they were the rounds of a man noting conditions that were satisfactory and the occasional condition that required attention. His father looked at the barony with the specific expression of someone who had been afraid for a long time and had been given evidence that the fear was no longer warranted. Not relaxation. Aldrich was not a man who relaxed in the sense of becoming careless. Something more precise, the calibration of effort to actual need rather than to chronic anxiety. He spoke to the people on his rounds the same way he always had, genuinely, with interest, without the performance of authority. The difference was in what people brought him. 3 years ago, they had brought him problems. Now they brought him things they wanted his opinion on, which was different. At the end of the 2nd inspection round, they stood at the high point of the barony's east ridge, looking at the valley. Aldrich said, "It's different." Kael said, "Yes." Aldrich said, "When I left for the graduation, I had been inside it for so long I couldn't see it properly. The distance helped." He looked at the valley. "It's better. Not just less bad. Actually better." Kael said, "Yes." Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know most of it isn't. I know you had a hand in most of it." Tandel. The trade route configuration. The compact letters from Brennan and Holt. He paused. "I'm not going to ask you to explain how, because I think you'd explain it in a way that didn't fully explain it, and I'd understand less than I do now." Kael said nothing. Aldrich said, "I just want you to know that I can see it. The gap between what this was and what it is." He looked at his son. "I can see that." He was not asking for acknowledgement. He was not asking for explanation. He was stating something he needed to say, which was his particular mode of honesty, the mode that did not require a response, only the receiving of it. Kael looked at the valley. He looked at it, the iron mine in the distance, the market, the farming village, the road that now carried traffic worth carrying, the alliance that held because it had been built correctly rather than impressively. He had built this from a desk in a capital city over 3 years while simultaneously managing the Academy's official requirements and the succession operation and the intelligence networks and the non-aggression agreement that had become something more than a non-aggression agreement. He had built this without ever being certain it would work, because that was the nature of building at that scale. You built correctly, and you watched, and you corrected, and you hoped the corrections were sufficient, and you did not know until the result was in front of you. The result was in front of him. He said, "The mine's foreman was a good hire." Aldrich said, "He was." A pause. Kael said, "The valley's going to need a formal winter storage arrangement before the 4th year. The trade route's volume will increase enough that the current seasonal holdover won't be adequate." Aldrich looked at him with an expression that contained a version of what the older woman in the village had shown him, the calibration of this person against what he was supposed to be and against what he obviously was. Then he said, "I'll write to Brennan about the shared facility." Kael said, "That's the right approach." They stood at the ridge for a while longer. Below them, the barony moved in the register of a place doing the work of an ordinary day, which was the register of places that were functioning as they should. The late summer light, it was July now, the deep summer quality that lasted until August, made the valley floor's colors distinct and specific: the gray of the stone, the brown of the worked earth, the particular green of the frontier's grass, which was a different shade than the capital's managed parks and a different shade again than the managed forest to the south. He had been looking at this particular green since he was 8 years old and had not seen it for 3 years. He looked at it now. It was the foundation. He had always known that it was the foundation. Seeing that it held, that 3 years of careful construction from a distance had produced something that actually held, was different from knowing it in the abstract. He filed this without extensive commentary. His father said, "Gareth has been training in the mornings." Kael said, "I noticed." Aldrich said, "He said you'd want to spar." Kael said, "Yes." A pause. Aldrich said, I don't know the training vocabulary. He's been doing something different with the training since about a year ago. More serious." Kael looked at the valley. He said, "I'll find out what." He had already noted it. He had noted it in the way he noted things that didn't yet fit the frame he had for them, with attention and without premature conclusion. He would find out what. They had been sparring since the 3rd morning. The first 2 sessions had been what he expected, Gareth running him through form corrections, assessing what 3 years of Academy Aura Track training had added and what it had failed to add. The Academy's Aura Track was good for producing silver-level competency in students with genuine cores. Gareth had opinions about what good meant in that context, and had spent the first 2 sessions identifying which of those opinions applied to Kael and which did not. Kael had not discussed his actual capability with Gareth. He had concealed his silver-level capacity through the standard suppression, the same suppression he had maintained for 8 years, the structural habit of it so ingrained that it ran without conscious management. Gareth trained what was presented. What was presented was a student who had done the Academy's form work and had better than average physical conditioning and an unusually good read on opponent movement. Not exceptional. Capable. Gareth had trained this in the first 2 sessions without comment. The 3rd session, he said, "Drop the suppression." Kael looked at him. Gareth said, "I've known about it since you were 9. A pause. "I'm not interested in training a fraction of what's there. Drop it." He had known. He had known for 7 years and had said nothing, and Kael revised the model he had been operating on in the fraction of a second it took to process this, and found that he had fewer questions than he expected and more of a particular quality that was not quite relief. He dropped it. What Gareth showed on his face when the suppression lifted was not surprise. That was the first thing he noted, registered, and filed without address. The subsequent sessions were different. He trained at his actual level, which was silver in the technical sense and something more difficult to categorize in the functional sense. Because the sovereign core did not follow the standard color development pattern, and Gareth's training for the past 7 years had been oriented toward someone whose core he already knew was different. The sparring was harder. Gareth's approach changed. He stopped pulling back to the degree he had been pulling back and gave Kael more to work against. The 4th week. He had been at the barony for just over 3 weeks. It was mid-July. The deep summer the frontier had between the brief spring and the early autumn, and the training sessions had moved to the early morning before the day heated into the range that made sustained physical exertion unpleasant. The yard behind the main house was paved stone, old, worn smooth by decades of use, and it caught the early light and held it in the specific way that stone held light differently from wood or earth. Gareth said, when Kael arrived at the yard that morning, "I'm going to remove the limiters." Kael set down the water cup he had brought. He said, "All of them." Gareth said, "Enough." He said it in the way he said things that he had thought about at length and had arrived at a position on. Not a declaration. A statement of what he had decided to do, offered without argument, because he was not interested in arguing. Kael said, "All right." He understood what this meant in the technical sense. Gareth was a diamond aura warrior. He had deduced this 2 years ago from the passive spatial senses reading of Gareth's presence, the specific density of it. which did not match the frontier soldier profile and matched nothing in the standard reference frame except the one that required him to revise his entire model of what Gareth was. He had revised it. He had not said anything about it. He had been waiting for Gareth to say something, which Gareth apparently intended to do in his own time. Gareth had not shown him diamond capability in any of their training sessions. He had always calibrated down, significantly, Kael now understood, down to something that could plausibly pass as a capable silver-level frontier fighter, which was the profile the barony's records supported. Removing the limiters meant something different from reducing the calibration by 20%. He had not stood in front of diamond-level output before. Gareth moved. He registered it. The spatial sense was, at its baseline, a passive awareness of the physical world within a moderate radius, movement, position, the density of presences, the angles of approach before they fully resolved. He had been using it for 8 years, since the earliest stage at which it had been reliable, and it had made him very good at reading the physical geometry of any situation before his eyes finished processing it. He could not be flanked. He could not be surprised from behind. He read the direction of a strike a fraction of a second before its full commitment. Against Gareth's current output, this was insufficient. The first exchange lasted 11 seconds. He blocked 3 of the 7 strikes that landed within the spatial sense's warning range, took 2, redirected 1, and missed the last entirely because Gareth had committed to a feint at the same moment he committed to the counter, and the gap between seeing the intention and seeing the execution was too narrow for correction. He hit the ground. He got up. The second exchange lasted less. He was faster in the corrections, but Gareth was faster in the generation, and the fundamental gap, not between their training or their discipline or their technique, but between their core output, the raw capacity that training sat on top of, was too wide for technique to bridge entirely. He could manage it. He could not close it. He got up after the third exchange and felt the specific quality of effort he had been putting out, which was everything he had available, and knew with a precision that did not require emotional framing that it was not going to be enough. Not for this. Not today, possibly not for months, possibly not for longer than that. He attacked again. He attacked with the full attention and discipline of someone who intended to use what was available rather than regret what wasn't, and Gareth met him with the full attention and discipline of someone who was not holding back and was not performing, which was a different quality from anything he had seen in 6 years of working with this man, and which had its own particular weight. The fourth exchange. The fifth. The sixth. He could read the patterns. Gareth's patterns were there, as everyone's patterns were there, the specific tendencies of a body and a trained response that had been doing this for 40 years. He saw them. He identified them. He knew, in the abstract analytical register, where the gaps were and how they could theoretically be exploited. The gap between that knowledge and the physical execution of it was the problem. He was fast. Gareth was faster by a factor that technique could not fully compensate for. Seventh exchange. He was on the ground again, breathing hard, and he looked at the sky above the training yard, the frontier sky in mid-morning, blue with a quality of openness that the capital sky never quite achieved, because the capital sky always had something in it. Some density of human construction that reduced it, and he thought about the problem. He was trying to win. He was trying to win in the literal, physical sense, to find the gap in Gareth's defense, to exploit the pattern he had identified, to convert technical knowledge into a physical result that closed the gap between their outputs. And this was not working, and the reason it was not working was not that he had identified the wrong patterns or was executing incorrectly. The reason it was not working was that winning was not the right question. He lay on the stone and looked at the sky and understood this. The shape of the battle. Gareth was 40 years of specific combat development, the particular form that a diamond-level practitioner took when they had spent their career on personal protection rather than offensive action, the specific balance of it. The weight distribution, the way the field projected slightly before the strike, so that a careful observer could feel the intention forming in the air before the body had committed. He had been reading this. He had been reading it as the preamble to a strike to be blocked or avoided. He was reading it wrong. The preamble was not a warning of a strike. The preamble was information about the space, about the geometry of what Gareth was doing with the space between them, how he was using it, what he understood about where Kael was, and what Kael had available. The strike was the conclusion of an analysis. Gareth wasn't attacking him. Gareth was continuously analyzing the spatial situation and selecting the response that the analysis indicated. He was doing the same thing. The difference was that Gareth was doing it at diamond speed and depth, and Kael was doing it at silver speed and whatever depth the sovereign core provided. But the sovereign core grew through understanding. Not through effort. Not through discipline. Through understanding the thing that was actually there rather than the thing he had been trying to manage. He got up. He did not get up to win. He got up to understand the space. He let the spatial sense run without trying to convert what it registered into tactical prediction. He let it register. He let it map. Gareth moved. He felt the pressure change in the air, the way the space between them reorganized itself around Gareth's intention, and he did not think about what to block. He thought about what Gareth was doing with the space. What geometry he was using. What he understood about where Kael was. The strike came. He redirected it, not blocked, redirected, which was a different kind of response, because it worked with the geometry of the strike rather than against it. And redirecting at this level required understanding the geometry before the commitment rather than reacting to the commitment. He felt what happened in the spatial sense when the redirect connected, the specific reorganization of the space around a changed intention. The information in it. He understood it. 3 seconds. And then the warmth. Not heat. Heat was a surface phenomenon, a quality of temperature registered at the skin. This was something that arrived from a place that was not the skin, and that was not the outside world, something internal, in the way that the spatial sense was internal, except that the spatial sense was a passive awareness, and this was a presence. Something that had been there already. He knew this immediately, the way you knew the shape of a room you had been standing in when someone lights a lamp and you realize you had been navigating by the architecture all along, becoming slightly, precisely more present. The spatial sense expanded. It did not feel like expansion in the directional sense. It felt like clarification. The 200-meter radius around him, which had previously been a general awareness of movement and presence, resolved into something with a different quality of precision. Every object in it. Every person. Every stone in the yard's paving, the way the morning light moved across them, the specific character of the air above each surface. Not vision, nothing like vision, nothing that required eyes. Unknowing. The precise architecture of 200 meters of space, available without effort, without focus, without the passive monitoring that the spatial sense had always required. He stood very still. He stood still for a long time. He was aware of the yard. He was aware of Gareth standing 15 feet in front of him, aware in the specific sense of knowing exactly where Gareth stood, the quality of his breathing, the position of his hands, the subtle reorganization of the air around him that preceded intention forming. He was aware of the main house beyond the yard's north wall. He was aware of the road at the valley's edge, where someone was driving a cart northeast toward the market. He was aware of the early birds in the tree at the property's boundary and the wind through the upper branches. He was aware of all of this at once, without any of it requiring management. He looked at Gareth. Gareth was watching him with an expression that Kael now filed, updated, not the expression of someone registering surprise. The expression of someone who had been waiting for a specific moment and had been watching for it and had now seen it arrive. Kael crossed the 15 feet between them in 2 strides and took Gareth's arm. He said, "Don't tell anyone." The words came out with a specific quality of urgency that was not panic. He did not panic. That was not available to him, but was the urgency of someone who understood immediately and precisely what it would mean for this to be known, and what it would cost, and what it would accelerate in the wrong ways at the wrong time. Gareth looked at him. He said, "Don't tell anyone," again, in the same register. Gareth said, "I know." He said it in the tone of someone who had known for 7 years what this day looked like and what it would require and what the correct response to it was. He said it in the tone of someone who had been waiting. Gareth sat down on the bench at the yard's edge. He sat the way he always sat, with the economy of someone who moved to where they needed to be and then stopped, but there was something in the particular quality of it this morning that was different from the quality of someone resting after exertion. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the paving stones in front of him. Then he looked up at Kael. He said, I need to tell you something I've been holding for 7 years. Kael was still standing in the middle of the yard. The expanded awareness ran at the edge of his perception, constant, ambient, the architecture of 200 meters of space available without effort. He could feel Gareth's breathing rate from 15 feet away. He filed this as background and gave Gareth his full attention. He said, Go ahead. Gareth said, I am not a retired frontier soldier. He said it with the directness of a man who had been carrying a specific weight and had decided to set it down in one movement rather than piece by piece. Not a confession. The word confession implied something that required absolution, and this did not read that way. A disclosure. Accurate, precise, long withheld for a reason that had been the correct reason and was now no longer the correct reason. Kael said, I know. Gareth looked at him. Kael said, Diamond aura. I estimated it 2 years ago from the passive awareness. The density doesn't match any silver profile. It matches approximately diamond, constrained to a silver presentation, which is a specific kind of control that takes years to develop. He paused. I didn't know the rest. Gareth was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the rest. He said it not as a question, but as an acknowledgement that there was a rest, and that it was his to give. I was a royal guard, Gareth said. One of the 12. Not the current guard, the previous king's guard. The king who died 12 years ago. He stopped. He was looking at the stone again, the specific look of a man who was placing the words deliberately, the way you place stones in a wall to ensure the structure would hold. His name was Aldrich II. Not your father, before. The king before the current king's father. Kael was quiet. He was a good king, Gareth said. He was not perfect. He made the errors that kings make when they have spent 20 years governing a kingdom that is larger than any one person can fully comprehend. But he was good in the specific sense that he was trying to get it right, and his definition of right matched what the kingdom actually needed more often than not. A pause. He died when you were 4. His son, the current king's father, succeeded him and died 7 years later. The current king is his grandson. Kael said, I know the succession line. Gareth said, yes. A pause. I wanted to place him for you. So the letter is placed. Kael said, what letter? Gareth looked at him. It was not a question he had expected, and the fact that it was not a question Gareth had expected registered as an interesting point of data. Gareth said, his letter. I'll get to it. Kael said, go ahead. Gareth said, in the king's last year, a scholar brought the palace a text. Partial, incomplete, written in an archaic dialect that required 6 months to translate fully. The scholar had found it in a private collection he had been cataloging from a house that had died out. The text was old. Not ancient. 300 years, approximately. From the period after the last convergence. He said convergence in the way he said diamond, as a technical term he had been taught, not one he had invented. Kael felt the word land in his awareness and said nothing. The text referred to something called the sovereign core, Gareth said. The scholar didn't know what to make of it. He brought it to the palace because texts from that period were supposed to be reported to the royal archive. The king, Aldrich II, read the translation himself. He had read a great deal of history. He recognized what the text was describing. Gareth's hands on his knees were still. The text said that a sovereign core would appear in the Ashford line. It didn't say when. It said it would appear in a time of approaching convergence, in a child whose core would read as fractured to standard testing. A pause. Gareth said, the king already had the palace's aura testing records. He went through them himself, 20 years of awakening ceremony records for the frontier region. One record matched, a child who had tested as a fractured core 18 months earlier. 8 years old. Son of Baron Aldrich Ashford of the frontier. Kael said, me. Gareth said, you. He said it with the specific quality of a man who had been looking at this particular fact for 7 years and had long since stopped finding it surprising. The king had a problem, Gareth continued. 2 problems. The first, the text was specific enough that he understood the sovereign core was not a defect, it was something the kingdom would need if the convergence came. The second, the eternal covenant of stars. He said the name in a register that was slightly different from the others, careful, as if the name itself warranted attention. "How much do you know about the Covenant?" Gareth asked. Kael said, "Enough. More than the standard account." Gareth looked at him. Then he said, "The king knew about the Covenant. He had been investigating it for 6 years. He knew it had penetrated the Church of Light's administrative structure deeply enough that any announcement of the Sovereign Core's existence would reach the Covenant within weeks. The Covenant's leadership had specific reasons to want a Sovereign Core wielder dead before development." A pause. "The king understood that announcing the discovery, would put a target on an 8-year-old child in a minor frontier barony. He decided against announcement." Kael said. "He chose protection instead." "He chose quiet protection," Gareth said. "He pulled me from the guard and transferred my record to a frontier sector, a retired frontier soldier, 48 years old, taking a minor post at a small barony. There was nothing in the record that would draw attention. The paperwork was ordinary. My cover was ordinary." He paused. "He sent me to your father without explaining why. He told Aldrich that the assignment was a personal favor, that I was a good man who needed a quiet position, and that the barony would benefit from a capable trainer for the boy. Your father asked no questions. He took me in." Kael said, "My father doesn't know." "No," Gareth said. "He doesn't know what I am or why I'm here. He knows I can train you, which was true before I knew what you were and has been more true as the years have passed." A pause. "He has never asked me to explain myself beyond what I've offered. He trusts easily, your father. More than he should, sometimes. But his trust has not been misplaced here." Kael looked at the yard. He looked at the worn stone that he had trained on for 6 years, the particular smooth places where the paving was oldest, the crack that ran along the 3rd row of stones from the south wall that had been there for as long as he could remember. He said, "The training was your initiative." Gareth said, "Yes. The king's instruction was to watch and protect." He said nothing about training. But it was obvious immediately that a Sovereign Core child with no physical capability would not survive long enough for the core to matter. The frontier is not safe for an unprotected child, and the specific dangers around you were not ordinary frontier dangers. A pause. "I decided on my own initiative to train you. I did not tell the king. He died before I could have told him." Kael said, "When?" Gareth said, 8 months after I arrived." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Kael processed the sequence. The king had sent Gareth to the barony, and then the king had died, and for 7 years Gareth had been operating on a dead man's instructions with no one to report to and no one to confirm that the instructions were still relevant. He had stayed. He had trained. He had watched. He said, "You've been alone in this for 7 years." Gareth said, "Yes." He said it with no bid for sympathy and no performance of hardship. It was simply the accurate description of the situation. Kael said, "Why today?" "You've known since the training started that I dropped the suppression. You've known the awareness expanded." "Why no?" Gareth said, "Because the letter should be read by someone who can use it." He paused. "And because I've been carrying it for 12 years and it was not written for me." Kael said, 12 years. Gareth said, "The king wrote it before he died. He gave it to me when he transferred my assignment." He said, "Give it to the bearer when the bearer is ready." He didn't define ready. A pause. "I've been making that determination on my own." Kael said, "And today?" Gareth said, "Today." He reached into the inner lining of his training jacket, not a concealed pocket in the ordinary sense, the specific sealed spatial configuration of a diamond-level practitioner's spatial storage, which Kael could now feel in the expanded awareness as a small pocket of organized space distinct from the ambient environment, and produced a sealed letter. The paper was old. Not deteriorated, preserved, carefully, in the way documents were preserved when someone understood that the preservation was a responsibility. The seal was red-black, a specific shade that Kael recognized from historical records, the personal seal of a king who had died 12 years ago, distinct from the royal seal because this was not a royal communication. It was a private one. The address on the front was written in a steady hand. "To the bearer of the Sovereign Core." Gareth held it out. Kael took it. He held it for a moment, the specific weight of paper that had been preserved for 12 years and handled very few times, which had a particular quality distinct from new paper. He felt the seal with one finger without breaking it. He looked at Gareth. He said, "You should know I've been building toward the succession problem from the other side. The current crown prince. His connection to the covenant." He paused. "I've known some of this was coming. Not the specifics. The shape of it." Gareth looked at him with the expression of someone who was not surprised by this and was not going to say that he was. Kael said, "There are things you should know. When you're ready to hear them." Gareth said, "When you're ready to say them." It was the exact right response. It was the response of a man who had been waiting for 7 years and had not developed the habit of rushing. Kael looked at the letter. He said, "I'm going to read this inside." Gareth said, "Yes." Kael said, "When I come out, I want to continue the training." A pause. "The same level." Gareth said, "Good." He said it with a quality that was the closest Gareth came to warmth, the specific register of a man whose loyalty expressed itself in the continuation of the work rather than in any acknowledgement of what the work meant. He had been here for 7 years. He intended to keep being here. The training would continue at the level it should have been from the beginning, now that there was no longer a reason to pretend otherwise. Kael crossed the yard toward the house with the letter in his hand and the expanded awareness at the edge of his perception and 7 years of a different kind of waiting beginning to resolve. He read it in his room, at his desk, with the window closed against the yard noise and the morning light coming in from the east at the angle that made the desk surface bright without being direct. He broke the seal carefully, which was not a practical concern. The seal's purpose was to show whether it had been opened, and Gareth already knew, but a quality of attention. Something in the gesture. He unfolded the paper. 3 pages, closely written, in a hand that was precise without being formal. The hand of someone who had been educated thoroughly and had been writing for decades and had reached the point where the handwriting expressed the writer's actual character rather than the training. He read the first page through completely before he allowed himself any analysis. To the bearer of the sovereign core. "I do not know your name. I have the testing record. Kael Ashford, son of Baron Aldrich Ashford, fractured core, awakening ceremony year 8. But I do not know if the record and the reader are the same person. I do not know if the record is still accurate. I do not know if you are young or grown when you read this, or in what circumstances Gareth has judged it correct to hand you this letter. I am writing this in the 2nd week of what my physicians have told me is the last month of my life. They have been accurate about most things. I expect they are accurate about this. I will try to be useful. The best thing I know how to offer you is honesty about what I know and precision about what I don't." He stopped here and looked at the window. The yard was visible through the glass, Gareth's bench, the yard's worn stone, the fence at the property's boundary. He looked at it for a moment and then returned to the letter. The 2nd paragraph described what the king knew about the sovereign core, and this was the longest section, 3/4 of the 1st page and nearly all of the 2nd. Dense with specific information organized in the way that a trained mind organized things it had worked on for a sustained period. The scholar's text had described the core as an anomaly in the standard aura progression, a core type that grew not through training and breakthrough, but through understanding, through genuine comprehension of the world's operating principles. The standard aura path was, in the king's summary of the text's argument, a path of force. The practitioners strengthened the will against resistance, broke through limitations, accumulated power through accumulated victory. The sovereign core was a path of integration. The practitioner comprehended rather than overcame, understood rather than forced, and advanced not when they were strongest, but when they were most clear about what they were looking at. The texts call it the sovereign core because the ancient records that mention it are associated with those who held sovereign function in the old sense, not kings, but anchors. People whose comprehension became wide enough to include the entire field they were embedded in. The sovereignty in the name is not political. It is spatial. The core, fully developed, perceives and integrates the space around it rather than projecting into it. He read this twice. He knew the shape of it, had known it in practice, in the passive awareness that had been with him since he could remember, in the expansion this morning that had resolved 200 meters of space into precise, available knowledge. He had known the shape, but had not had the frame for it. The frame was in this letter, and the frame was accurate. The king wrote about what the core meant in the larger sense in the third paragraph of the second page, and here the letter changed register, became more personal, more uncertain, the writing of a man who was at the edge of what he knew and was saying so. The convergence is not a historical event in the sense that most people who study history treat historical events as things that happened and are therefore finished. It is a cycle. The records I have been able to assemble, with significant difficulty, suggest a period of approximately 300 years between events. The last convergence was 297 years ago. I do not know if my arithmetic is correct. I believe it is approximately correct. The world has a specific vulnerability during a convergence. The dimensional boundary weakens, something from outside presses through. The world's aura field, which is a coherent whole, fractures under the pressure. What stabilized it 300 years ago, what stopped the fracture from being complete, is recorded in the texts that remain, and the records are incomplete, and I do not know with certainty that what I am about to tell you is fully accurate. But the records suggest that the stabilizing mechanism was a person. Not a warrior who defeated the external pressure. A person whose integration was complete enough to serve as an anchor, whose comprehension of the field they were embedded in was wide enough to hold it coherent while it was being pressed from outside. The sovereign of the Eastern Spire in the records. The texts don't agree on whether this was a title or a name. They agree that it was one person, and that what allowed this person to serve as an anchor was a specific quality of core that the texts call sovereign. He read this paragraph twice, then continued. I am telling you this because you need to know what you are carrying. Not the specific weight of it that I cannot convey and would not try, but the factual content. You have something that appears once every few centuries and that the world does not know it needs until the need is immediately present. The convergence cycle is approximately 300 years. You are living in the approach. I do not know if you will be ready. I do not know if the core develops on a schedule that aligns with the cycle's timing. I chose to protect rather than announce because I was afraid that announcing would produce a target before there was the capability to withstand being a target. I may have been wrong. The eternal covenant of stars, which you will know by the time you read this or will learn, would have moved against you the moment your existence was known. I chose to hope that quiet protection and time would produce a bearer who could manage their own disclosure. This may have been the wrong choice. It was the best choice I could see. The third page was shorter than the first two. The hand was slightly less steady. He noted this and assessed it as fatigue rather than distress, the specific loosening of control that came from sustained writing late in a period of physical difficulty. The content was different from the first two pages, specific rather than explanatory. The king had included 3 things. First, the names of 2 scholars who had worked on the text translation and had, in the king's assessment, understood what they were reading. Both were dead. But their private papers were held in a specific location, a private library in the capital that the king named, which was not a royal institution, which meant it might still exist and might still hold what it had held when the king wrote. Second, the one additional fact the king had been able to confirm independently, which was that the eternal covenant of stars had been looking for a sovereign core bearer for at least a generation. This was not in the scholar's text. The king had learned it from an intelligence report he had received and could not fully verify, but he had believed it credible. The covenant wanted the core, either controlled or destroyed. The king did not know which. Third, a single sentence that served as the letter's close. He read the third page through twice, more slowly than the first 2. Then he set the pages on the desk in order and looked at them. He sat with the window light and the letter, and the expanded awareness of the room around him, the particular quality of the space when he was alone in it, the way the silence of mid-morning had a specific texture in this room at this time of year. And he thought about what the letter had given him, and what it had confirmed, and what it had opened. The shape of it was not new. He had known there was something at the center of the sovereign core's unusual behavior, the growth through understanding, the passive spatial sense, the specific quality of advancement that didn't match the standard pattern. He had not had a name for the shape. He had not had the frame of the convergence, not precisely, not from a source he trusted completely. He had known from the novel he'd read in his previous life that something called the convergence existed and mattered. The novel had not given him the mechanics of it, or the timeline, or the specific role of the sovereign core within it. This letter gave him the mechanics. The framework. The frame for what he was doing and what it was for. He had already been building toward the succession because the succession was necessary. He had already been building toward the barony's stability because the barony was the foundation. He had already been building toward the noble council positioning because the crown prince's reign would be catastrophic and Kaelin's could be functional. He had been building all of this for reasons that were legible and sufficient on their own terms. The letter added another layer beneath the legible reasons, a layer he could not act on directly yet, because acting on the convergence required capabilities he did not have, and because the timeline was in years, possibly decades, and the immediate problems were in months. But knowing the layer was there changed the quality of the work, made it legible in a different way. He gathered the pages back into their order and folded them carefully, along the original folds, so that the paper returned to the configuration it had held for 12 years. He held the folded letter for a moment. Then he stood, crossed to the window, and looked at the yard. Gareth was still on the bench. He was not doing anything in particular, sitting with his hands on his knees, looking at the yard stone. The posture of someone who had discharged a responsibility and was allowing himself to simply exist for a moment before the next thing. Kael opened the window. He said, "Gareth." Gareth looked up. Kael said, "The two scholars in the letter. Ven and Aldous." He had the names. Are there others who knew? Either the text content or the king's response to it. Gareth said, "Not that I know of." He was careful. Kael said, "The Covenant's intelligence infrastructure at the time he wrote this, do you know how much they knew about the investigation?" Gareth said, "Less than they know now, I expect." Kael said, "Yes." A pause. Gareth said, "You'll need more context for that than I have." Kael said, "I have sources." He looked at the letter in his hand. "How many people know your royal guard?" Gareth said, "Your father doesn't. No one else in the barony does." A pause. In the capital, the specific transfer record was handled by one clerk who has been dead for 9 years. The guard's official records were adjusted by the king himself. As far as the current guard's records are concerned, I died of a fever 6 months after my retirement. Kael said, "Good." He meant it as an assessment. Gareth said, "You had questions about the convergence." Kael said, "I'll come back out in a few minutes." He paused. "We'll train. And then we'll talk about what else you know." Gareth said, "All right." Kael closed the window. He stood in the room for a moment longer with the letter in his hand, and the morning light on the desk and 12 years of a dead man's hope present in the specific quality of old paper. Then he set it on the desk and went to continue the training. He read the letter's final line again that evening. He read it the same way he had read the body of it, at his desk, in the hour after dinner, when the barony's main house had settled into the quiet of the late evening and the light through the window was the blue dark of summer dusk, which lasted longer at the frontier's latitude than it did in the capital. He had read the letter 3 times now, in the way he read things that required multiple passes to hold correctly, once for content, once for structure, once for what he had missed on the first 2 readings. The final line was, "I don't know if this reaches you in time. I don't know if you are ready. But I know what the core means, and I know what is coming. The convergence has a cycle. We are in it. I am sorry the weight of this is yours. I hope you have someone beside you." He read it twice. The second reading was slower than the first. He thought about the people in the novel he had read, the version of this story where Kael Ashford was a minor villain, a blackmailer, who was destroyed and killed at 16. He thought about the king who had written this letter 12 years ago, who had sent Gareth to a minor frontier barony and had tried to protect something he didn't fully understand, and had died 8 months later without knowing whether the protection had been adequate. He thought about what in time meant, and what ready meant, and what the honest answers to both were. In time, he was 16. The convergence cycle, according to the letter, was approximately 300 years. The last one was 297 years ago. The arithmetic produced a number that was approximately 3 years from now. He did not know if the letter's timeline was accurate. He did not know if approximately 300 years meant 2 years or 8 years or 15. He knew that the king had believed it was coming, and the king had been operating on the best information available to him. And the best information available to a king with access to the royal archive and 6 years of private investigation was worth taking seriously. In time for what, exactly? For the core to develop to the level the convergence required. The power system's logic, as he understood it from the expansion this morning, from the specific experience of comprehension that had produced the gold breakthrough, pointed toward a progression that was years long. Diamond was not an imminent milestone. He would reach it when he reached it, and the convergence would arrive when it arrived, and the relationship between those two timelines was something he could influence, but not control. He sat with the letter and the evening and the fact that he was 16 years old and a dead king had written him a letter apologizing for the weight of what he was carrying. He thought about this. He thought about his father on the ridge above the valley, looking at what 3 years of careful management had produced, saying, "I can see it." He thought about Gareth on the yard's bench, saying, "I need to tell you something I've been holding for 7 years," in the tone of a man who had been carrying a specific responsibility long past the point where it was comfortable and had finally been able to set it down. He thought about what he knew of the kingdom's political situation and the succession operation and the noble council positioning that Seraphine was running in the capital without him and the 4 months remaining in the king's designation window. He thought, briefly, about Seraphine. Not about her in the political register, not about the succession operation, not about the information-sharing pact, not about the 3-component positioning mechanism. He thought about her in the specific, brief, unguarded register that he normally redirected before it fully formed, the register that had been present since the graduation garden. Since something involuntary had arrived in her in the middle of a house storm wall conversation, and she had been unable to fully contain it, and since he had filed it without classification because he did not have a classification for it that was accurate. The letter's last sentence, "I hope you have someone beside you." He looked at the window. The dusk had deepened into full dark. The frontier night had a specific quality of quiet at this time of year, not silence, because the night was full of the ordinary sounds of a place where people and animals and wind and insects existed, but a quiet that was different from the capital's night, which always had the distant quality of 400,000 people occupying the same space simultaneously. Here the quiet was the quiet of a place that was the correct size for its population. He thought about what it meant to have someone beside you in the sense the letter intended, which was not the same thing as having operational partners or intelligence contacts or even allies in the full sense of people who had committed resources to a shared goal. He thought about the specific version of it that the situation would permit, and that was already, in some form, present. He folded the letter. He folded it along the original folds, the same way he had folded it this morning, with the same quality of attention. The quality of someone who understood that certain things warranted care in the handling independent of whether the care changed their content. He pressed the folds flat. He held it for a moment, the specific weight of 12-year-old paper, and then he put it away. He sat at the desk for a while after. He thought about the batch of things that were true as of this moment. He was 16 years old, gold aura achieved and concealed, the expanded awareness at the edge of his perception mapping the 200 meters around him with a precision that had been unavailable this time yesterday. The barony was stable. He had seen this in person over 3 weeks, in the mine and the trade route and the farming village and his father's bearing. The Eastern Frontier Compact was real and holding. The succession operation was in motion. The designation window was 4 months. Gareth's identity had been disclosed. The letter had been read. The dead king's understanding of the convergence was now in Kael's possession, and was both more and less than he had hoped, which was what information usually was. The dead king had hoped he had someone beside him. He was not going to examine this further tonight. It was not the kind of thing that benefited from extended examination at the end of a day that had already contained a gold breakthrough and a revelation, and a letter and a conversation with Gareth that had lasted 2 hours and covered things that would require weeks to fully integrate. He would think about it when he was ready to think about it. He was not ready to think about it tonight. He was aware that he had thought about her twice in the past 3 minutes. He filed this without classification. He went to the window and looked out at the dark. The barony's main house was high enough on the ridge that the valley's lights were visible below, the specific pattern of them, the farmhouses and the market's braziers and the distant iron mines' night lanterns. He had been looking at this view since he was 8 years old and had not seen it for 3 years, and was now looking at it with an expanded awareness that mapped all of it with a precision that was, in its way, more intimate than vision. He stood there for a while. He thought about what was built and what remained to be built. The foundation was the barony, it held. The next phase was the succession intervention, which was running. The phase after that was the thing the king's letter had put a name to, the convergence preparation, the specific quality of development the core required. The things that could not be rushed and could not be forced, and had to be understood rather than accumulated. All 3 phases were operating simultaneously. They would continue to operate simultaneously. He was not going to make the error of treating them as sequential, because the world did not arrange itself into convenient sequences. He was 16 years old and had a gold aura and a dead king's letter and a diamond-level guardian who had been carrying a 7-year secret and a pact with the most capable political operator he had ever encountered, and a barony that was against the odds that had applied when he arrived here at age 8 in a dying barony with a failing father and no resources except 8 years of a previous life's reading, genuinely functioning. He looked at the valley's lights. He was not going to say he was grateful. Gratitude was not the right word for what he felt about the accumulation of facts that had produced this moment, not because it was absent, but because it was not sufficient. Because the correct register was something more complex than gratitude, and he did not yet have the precise word for it. He was going to keep building. He had always been going to keep building. The letter had not changed this. It had named what he was building toward in a different register, a wider one, and had confirmed that the building mattered in a way that extended past the immediate problems he could see. This was useful. It was the kind of useful that settled rather than the kind that excited, and settling was, in his experience, more durable. He put his hand on the window frame and looked at the frontier dark. He thought, I don't know if you're ready. He thought, neither do I. He thought about what the king could not have known, that this particular 16-year-old had been 32 years old once, in a different life, and had read a novel that described a version of this world, and had arrived here with enough foreknowledge to avoid the worst of the early disasters. What the king couldn't have known he couldn't have accounted for. The letter was written to whoever received it. It was honest about its own limitations. He respected the honesty. He went back to the desk. He put the ring on the desk's surface and looked at it, the spatial ring he had acquired in the first year at the academy, which held his cipher notebooks and certain documents, and the letter he had just placed there. The dead king's letter, next to 3 years of his own work in the same space. He sat down. He picked up his writing. He had 3 letters to draft, the specific inquiry to Seraphine about the Noble Council administrative access, a letter to Torin about the next phase of the commercial documentation, and a brief communication to House Brennan about the winter storage arrangement that the barony's valley would need before the 4th year. He drafted them in order. The Seraphine letter was the longest. It contained the specific technical inquiry about the routing structure he had hypothesized, the timeline analysis's implication for the designation window's urgency, and 2 questions about the current Noble Council positioning status that he needed answered before the next phase could be calibrated. He wrote, at the end of it, 1 additional line. He wrote, the assessment of the barony's current state is complete. It is what it needed to be. He folded the letter. He sat for a moment with the late dark outside and the house around him quiet and the valley below going about its night. Then he sealed the letter and put it with the others to be sent in the morning and went to sleep. Arc 4 was done. The first report arrived from House Brennan on the 18th of August. He read it at the barony's main table over his morning tea, in the specific register he used for compact intelligence, not the personal correspondence register, not the cipher notebook register, but the flatter, more deliberate register of someone reading for data that might be important and was not yet classifiable. House Brennan had the southern sector of the compact's coverage area, which meant they were the closest to the frontier proper, the actual boundary zone where the kingdom's territory ended and the contested region began. The report said, 3 raids in the past 6 weeks, hitting village clusters 2 days' ride south of Brennan's main holding. 2 of the 3 had been coordinated, arriving at 2 locations within the same 4-hour window, which had split the local garrison's response capacity and allowed both raiding parties to complete their objective before the response could consolidate. The 3rd had been a solo raid, different target type, not a village but a supply depot at a crossroads, which suggested either a different raiding group or a deliberate variation in target selection. He read this, put it down, and read House Ketterly's weekly summary from 3 days earlier, which he had already read but was now reading again. Ketterly covered the eastern section. Their report from 2 weeks ago mentioned 2 raids, single location, single hour, not coordinated. The earlier pattern, which he had been tracking since June, 6 raids over 12 weeks, all single location, all single hour, none coordinated. Then the Brennan report. He put both reports on the table and looked at them. Coordinated attacks required communication between raiding parties at minimum, and likely some form of command structure that could set timing and objective parameters. Historical demon raid patterns, and he had read everything in the barony's library and in the reports he had been requesting from compact members for 3 years, were not coordinated in this sense. Historical patterns were a demon force large enough to overwhelm the target attacks the target, takes what it wants, people, sometimes livestock, sometimes specific materials that appeared in post-raid inventories, and withdraws. The historical pattern was force multiplied by surprise. The withdrawal timing was variable. The target selection was opportunistic. What the Brennan report described was not opportunistic. 2 locations, 4-hour window, split garrison response, both raids complete on schedule before the response consolidated. This was a plan executed by 2 groups against a shared objective, which was the garrison's response capacity rather than the specific villages. The villages were the bait. The garrison depletion was the point. He wrote this down in the cipher notation. He wrote, garrison depletion as objective. Villages as targeting mechanism for the response rather than the primary target. This is not demon logic. This is human logic using demon capability as the weapon. He wrote, question, who is providing the tactical framework? The demons do not have a history of this kind of operational thinking. Someone is either coordinating them directly or has trained specific demon units to execute human pattern tactics. Both require sustained human contact with a demon force over a significant period. He wrote, the Order has sustained contact with a demon force. This is established from the novel's broad plot. He looked at what he had written. He set the pen down and stood and walked to the window. The barony's morning was visible outside, the yard, the road, the valley beginning its daily work. Ordinary. The specific ordinary of a place that was far from what the Brennan report described in distance, but not in structure. The attacks were 3 border regions, per the Brennan and Ketterly reports combined. He did not have direct reports from the other 2 border regions yet, but the Compact's communication protocols would produce them within 2 weeks. He was already constructing the hypothesis on incomplete data, which was something he did carefully and with explicit notation of its speculative character. But the shape of the incomplete data was suggestive enough that waiting 2 weeks for confirmation before forming a working hypothesis was worse than forming one now and being prepared to revise it. He went back to the table and wrote the working hypothesis. Assumption: provisional. The demon raids along the southern frontier are not independent actions. They are a coordinated operation with a command structure capable of setting timing and target parameters across multiple simultaneous raiding groups. The coordination implies human equivalent or human-assisted tactical thinking. The operational objective, based on current evidence, appears to be the systematic depletion of frontier garrison response capacity and the establishment of a pattern of fear in frontier villages. If the objective is garrison depletion and fear establishment, the current raid scale is consistent with a sustained preparatory campaign. Raids at this scale do not threaten the kingdom directly. They establish the conditions for a larger operation by exhausting local resources, eroding civilian confidence, and demonstrating the inadequacy of the current frontier defensive structure. What the larger operation is, unknown. The Order's involvement, if confirmed, suggests the larger operation serves an Order objective. The order's objectives that would benefit from frontier disruption, multiple candidates, insufficient data to rank them at this time. He put the pen down. He had been tracking the demon raid reports for 6 weeks, since the first Ketterly report had mentioned raids that were slightly atypical in their execution. He had not said anything about it to Aldrich yet, and he had not written to the Compact about the coordination hypothesis yet. Because hypothesis was not intelligence and 6 weeks of slightly atypical raids was not a pattern with the kind of evidence density he wanted before making an operational claim. The Brennan report was the piece that changed the density. He read the report again, the third time, more slowly. The detail that he had registered on the first read and returned to on the third, the depot raid, the third event in the 6-week period, had targeted a supply crossroads that had specific strategic value for the garrison's mobile response capacity. This was not a random target. A random target would be a village, which was what the first 2 raids had targeted, and which was the standard pattern for opportunistic demon raids that were looking for people or livestock. A supply crossroads had no people, no livestock. It had equipment, provisions, and the specific materials that allowed a mobile garrison force to operate at range from its base. Destroying it reduced the garrison's operational reach in the specific way that degraded their ability to respond to coordinated simultaneous raids. Someone knew the garrison's supply structure. Someone had provided that knowledge to the raiding force, and the raiding force had used it with a specific precision of people who had been given a target selection rationale rather than simply a target. He wrote, "Supply depot targeting indicates human source tactical intelligence provided to demon raiding groups. This is operational coordination, not coincidence." He sat with this for a moment. Then he wrote to the other Compact members. Not the full analysis, not yet. He wrote asking for 2 specific things: the complete raid report for August, with specific detail on target type and attack timing for each event, and any information about unusual demon activity in the contested zone. Specifically any sightings of demon units behaving in ways atypical to historical pattern, scouting behavior, patrol behavior, anything that looked like reconnaissance rather than raid preparation. He sent all 4 letters the same morning. He wrote to Seraphine as well, though differently. Not the full analysis. The Compact correspondence was appropriate for the Compact. The Seraphine correspondence was appropriate for what Seraphine needed to do with it in the capital. He wrote to her, "There is a developing pattern in the frontier raid activity that suggests coordination beyond historical demon behavior. I am completing the intelligence picture over the next 2 weeks. Before the picture is complete, I want to flag this. The capital's current response capacity to sustained frontier incursion is inadequate. I will send the full assessment when I have it. You may want to begin positioning for the political implications before the assessment arrives." He thought about the capital's response to frontier demon raids as established by historical record and by what he had been able to map of the current administrative structure's priorities. The capital's response to frontier demon raids was Templar deployment, formal condemnation committee. The Templar deployment was trained for church functions. The committee would report in 3 months. The frontier lords would be responsible for their own garrison forces and would receive no additional support until the committee had reported and the report had been reviewed and the review had been acted upon, which was a timeline of months. He calculated the approximate timeline of the current raid escalation based on the past 6 weeks' data and the hypothesis about coordination. If the pattern continued at the current rate of escalation, the frontier garrison capacity would be significantly degraded within 2 months. If the larger operation that the raids were preparing for was launched before the frontier lords had adapted their defensive structure, the first stage response would be inadequate. He was a 16-year-old minor baron's son in a frontier barony with no standing to tell the capital anything. He was also, as of 3 weeks ago, the only gold-level practitioner in the frontier region with a comprehensive picture of what the frontier lords collectively knew and an operational intelligence network that reached into the capital through Seraphine and into the regional commercial networks through Torin. He was not going to wait for the committee to report in 3 months. He set the Seraphine letter aside and started a different page, the private analytical document he had been keeping since the first raid report in June, which was not cipher and was not correspondence, but was the working record of what he thought. without the need to manage what the reader would do with it. He wrote at the top of a new section, August. The pattern is established. The coordinated raids are the preparatory phase of a larger operation. I do not have enough data to characterize the larger operation with confidence. I have enough data to characterize the frontier's current defensive structure as inadequate to respond to it. The capital will not respond in time. What I can do, and what I should do, and what I am going to do. He wrote the list. He wrote it the way he wrote everything precisely, without sentiment, with the specific practicality of someone who had been planning for a long time and had arrived at the moment when planning needed to transition to execution. He wrote it and looked at it. The items on the list were achievable. They were not easy, and they were not without cost, and some of them required things that he had not been planning to do yet, things that changed who he was publicly in ways that were irreversible. He had been concealing his actual capability since the beginning. The next phase required a different calculation. He picked up the pen. He put an asterisk next to the item that said, Gold Aura Capability, announced to compact at earliest practical timing. He wrote next to the asterisk, Do this first. Everything else requires it. He set the pen down and looked out the window at the barony's morning. Then he went back to work. The capital's response arrived through 3 channels on the same day. The first was the official announcement, which reached the barony through the royal messenger's northern circuit on the 24th of August, 3 days after he had sent the compact's request for the complete August raid data, and 12 days after Seraphine had received his preliminary flag and presumably begun whatever positioning the political implications suggested to her. The announcement was formal and precise in the way that official announcements were formal and precise. Specific language, specific signatories, specific operational commitments stated in the specific terms that committed to the form of action without committing to the substance of it. Formal condemnation of demon raid activity along the southern frontier. 2 additional Templar units assigned to the southern border sector under the authority of the High Templar Malakar's Southern Command. A royal commission to assess the frontier situation, with a formal report due in 3 months. He read it at the table. He read it twice. Then he read it a 3rd time, the way he read things that were saying something by what they weren't saying. The formal condemnation, appropriate in form, politically neutral, produced no operational consequence. The Templars would receive it as authorization to treat demon activity in the condemned region as within their operational mandate. The demon raiding groups would not receive it at all. The Templar units, 2 additional units to the southern sector. The southern sector's current Templar complement was 1 unit, trained for church combat functions, which meant consecration rituals, corruption purification, and formal engagement of demonstrated demonic entities at small scale. Their effectiveness against organized demon units using coordinated human pattern tactics was, in his estimate, significantly below their effectiveness against the uncoordinated opportunistic raids the standard Templar training was designed to address. The 2 additional units had received the same training. 3 units of inadequately configured capability was not substantially better than 1. The Royal Commission. 3 months. He set the announcement down. The second channel was Seraphine's letter, which arrived the same afternoon through the private courier service she had been using since March. A service that ran 3 days faster than the Royal Messenger circuit by using a different routing that he had identified and she had arranged. Her letter was 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph confirmed that she had received his flag and had used the 12 days to position 2 noble council members who had frontier holdings to submit formal questions to the Royal Commission before its first session, which would put 2 specific items on the Commission's intake agenda: the nature of the tactical coordination in the current raids, and the adequacy of Templar training for non-standard demon engagement. The questions would ensure the Commission could not avoid addressing these items, even if the Commission's final answer was inadequate. The second paragraph told him that the capital's intelligence apparatus had received raid reports from the southern frontier 6 weeks before he had flagged the coordination hypothesis and had classified them as within normal demon activity variants. The classification had been made by an officer in the Eastern Intelligence Desk whose name she included. She was looking into the officer. The third paragraph said, "The announcement is what I expected." The commission is the capital's way of acknowledging a problem without having to commit resources to solving it before the political cost-benefit calculus becomes clearer. This is not corruption. It is the standard institutional response to an unclear threat. The commission will likely produce an adequate report if given accurate information. The question is whether accurate information reaches it. I will continue working on that problem from here. The fourth paragraph said, your assessment of the raid pattern. I need it complete before the commission's first session, which is scheduled for the 15th of September. Send it as soon as the August data from the compact is assembled. He wrote the note in the margin, September 3rd. 11 days. The third channel was Torrens' regional brief, which arrived through the commercial post and was addressed to the barony as a routine trade correspondence, but contained, in the specific cipher notation he had worked out with Torrens' eastern representative, the regional commercial intelligence that the merchant network provided. Torrens' briefs were not political documents. They were the specific data of people who moved goods across the frontier region and noticed what was happening to the roads, the traffic patterns, and the safety assessments they applied to various routes. The August brief from Torren noted 16 routes in the southern frontier corridor had been reclassified from low risk to elevated risk in the past 6 weeks. 11 of those 16 had been reclassified within the past 3 weeks. The reclassification was based on 2 factors, actual raid incidents on or adjacent to the routes, and the specific kind of merchant intelligence that was not reported in official channels, the travelers who had turned back, the locals who had changed their movement patterns, the inns along the routes that had stopped doing the specific kind of business that depended on people feeling safe moving after dark. 11 routes reclassified in 3 weeks. The pattern of them was not random. He put Torrens' brief on the table next to the official announcement and Seraphine's letter, and he looked at the 3 documents together. The capital's announcement said, 2 additional Templar units and a 3-month committee. The capital's announcement did not contain the route reclassification data from Torrens' network, the coordinated attack pattern from the compact's intelligence sharing, or Seraphine's note about the 6-week-old classified reports that had been assessed as within normal variance. The capital's announcement had been made on the basis of information that was neither comprehensive nor current. He picked up his private analytical document and read what he had written the previous week. The capital will not respond in time. He added below it, the capital has responded with the tool that it has, the Templar structure, which is not the right tool for this problem. The commission format will produce a better recommendation than the current response in 3 months. 3 months is not the relevant timeline. The compact needs an adapted defensive structure in place before the larger operation begins. Best estimate of timeline for the larger operation, before the commission reports. The adequate response requires 1. Correct tactical understanding of the raid pattern. 2. A coordinated defensive structure across all 5 frontier baronies. 3. Capability at a level that the current frontier garrison forces do not have and the Templar structure cannot provide for the specific engagement type anticipated. What I am, a 16-year-old frontier baron's son with a gold aura I have not announced and a private network that has produced a more accurate picture of the frontier situation than the capital's Eastern Intelligence Desk. What I am authorized to do under Frontier Compact provisions, share intelligence with Compact members and propose coordinated action for Compact endorsement. What I am actually capable of contributing militarily, the gold aura changes the relevant calculus significantly. A gold practitioner coordinating the Frontier Lord's existing forces can accomplish substantially more than the existing forces without coordination or capable leadership. What I need to do before September 15th, complete the tactical assessment, draft the compact coordination proposal, and announce the capability that makes the proposal credible. He read this through once. Then he wrote one more line. The kingdom is not going to rescue the frontier. The frontier is going to have to demonstrate what it can do while the kingdom decides whether to authorize it. He folded the analytical document, which he was not going to send to anyone, it was for him, to maintain precision about what he thought rather than what he could say, and set it in the spatial ring. He picked up Seraphine's letter and wrote her a reply. He told her the complete assessment would arrive before September 3rd. He confirmed her reading of the Commission's limitations and agreed that accurate information reaching the Commission before its first session was the correct long-term play. He told her there was a development in his capability that he had not yet disclosed through correspondence, but would need to deploy in the frontier response. He would explain in a subsequent letter. She should factor into her capital side positioning the possibility that the frontier would be conducting an independent coordinated defense before the Commission reported. He paused. He wrote, "The independent coordination will be visible. It will require the frontier lords to act without royal sanction. The political cost of this will need managing. I'd like your assessment of how to structure it so the capital receives it as competent initiative rather than insubordination." He sealed the letter. He thought about what else was in his hand at this moment and what else was required. The compact communication. He was drafting the request for the August data, which he had already sent. He needed the data in 2 weeks. He would have it in 2 weeks because the compact's communication protocol ran on the schedule he had established and the members had been consistent for 3 years. The capability announcement. This was the irreversible one. He had been concealing his actual aura level since the awakening ceremony. Announcing gold aura to the compact, specifically, in the context of the frontier crisis, was a commitment that changed who he was publicly in the frontier region permanently. Once announced, he could not become unannounced. The frontier lord's relationship with him would change. The capital's eventual awareness of it would change. The Duke Crestfall situation, the specific calculation about what Kael Ashford was, would change. He had been planning to announce when the time was right. The time was now. Not because it was ideal timing. Because the crisis created the context that made the announcement readable as what it was, a practical necessity, not a power display. And because the defensive coordination that the frontier needed could not be proposed credibly by someone who was presenting as an academy-trained minor baron's son with no demonstrated capability. The compact lords were practical people. They needed a reason to follow a 16-year-old's tactical assessment rather than managing their own garrisons independently. The reason had to be real. He was real. He picked up the pen. He began drafting the letter to the 5 compact members that would arrive before the September 15th commission session and before the larger demon operation, which he did not know when it was coming and was going to be ready for regardless. He wrote the announcement of his capability at the end of the letter's opening section, in the specific register that was factual without being boastful, which was the register that frontier lords could receive without feeling that they were being managed. He wrote, "There is a material relevant to the proposed coordination that I should state directly. I am a gold aura practitioner. This has not been public information. I am stating it now because it changes the practical calculus of what coordinated frontier action can achieve, and because you are entitled to know this before deciding whether to commit your baronies to a coordinated response." He read this over. He added, "I am 16. I understand the weight of asking for your commitment on this basis. I am asking because the situation is what it is, and because I believe the assessment is correct, and because the frontier does not have a better option available at this time." He sealed the letter. He looked at the pile of correspondence on the table, the official announcement, Seraphine's 4 paragraphs, Torrens' commercial brief, and the 3 letters he had written. He looked at the frontier morning outside the window, which was the same frontier morning it had been 3 hours ago when he had started reading. Except that he had done something irreversible in the past 2 hours, and the situation he was managing had shifted from analysis to execution. He was ready. He had always been going to be ready. That was the specific quality of things built correctly. When the moment arrived, the readiness was there. He went to find Gareth. They had training in the afternoon, and then he needed to tell him what was in the letters, and then he needed Gareth's assessment of the defensive structure he was proposing. Because Gareth had 40 years of diamond-level combat experience and no institutional loyalty to the capital's way of thinking about frontier defense, which was precisely the perspective he needed. He crossed the yard. The morning was clear, the frontier autumn just beginning in the quality of the light. The compact members' responses arrived within 4 days of each other, which was faster than the standard protocol, and was the protocol's way of telling him that the situation had reached the level where the standard timeline was no longer felt as acceptable. House Brennan wrote first, because Brennan's holding was closest to the active raid zone and had the most immediate sense of the urgency. Lord Brennan was 61 years old and had been managing his southern barony for 30 years and had seen 3 periods of elevated demon activity in that time, none of which had looked like this one. He wrote, "Your tactical assessment matches what I am seeing in the field. The coordination observation is correct. I am glad someone has named it. Regarding your personal disclosure, I have heard the name Kael Ashford at least twice from regional merchants as someone whose assessment of the mine situation in the barony is accurate. I do not know what else you have been doing, but I suspect it is more than the Academy record suggests. I am listening." House Ketterly wrote second, with a different register, the register of a man who was cautious by temperament and was being made less cautious by the data. He confirmed the August raid data for his sector, which added 3 events to the picture and 2 of which fit the coordinated pattern. He said, "The gold aura disclosure is significant. I want to understand what it means in practical terms for the proposed coordination before I commit. I will come to a meeting." House Aldenvane and House Merrick wrote within a day of each other, Aldenvane directly and Merrick through an agent. Aldenvane was the oldest and most skeptical of the Compact Lords, Lord Aldenvane III, 73, who had joined the Compact 3 years ago because the economic benefits were real and because Aldrich Ashford's name had been good in the frontier for 30 years, not because he had any expectation that the arrangement would produce anything like what it was now producing. His response said, "I have 3 garrison captains who will tell me I am wasting their time if I send them to a coordinated response led by a 16-year-old who has been at the academy for 3 years. Tell me why they are wrong." This was the most useful response. He wrote back to Aldenvane the same day, specifically and in detail. Merrick's agent delivered. Lord Merrick would attend a meeting, would not commit before seeing the tactical assessment in person, and had a question about the legal framework for coordinated frontier action without royal sanction. He had expected this question. He had the answer ready. The Eastern Frontier Compact's founding charter, which he had drafted 3 years ago in collaboration with his father and the initial Compact members, contained a provision for coordinated emergency defensive action. The provision had been included at his insistence, against the advice of Lord Aldenvane's then representative, who had thought it unnecessary. The provision allowed coordinated military action within the frontier region when the regional garrison forces assessed the threat as requiring combined response and when royal sanction was not available on the relevant timeline. It did not require royal approval in advance. It required notification to the Royal Commission within 10 days. He had written it into the charter because he had known, 3 years ago, that there would be a moment when the provision was necessary. The charter provision was the legal framework. He sent Merrick's agent back with the specific charter section and a note. The Commission receives notification within 10 days. The Frontier Lords retain command of their own garrisons. The coordination structure I am proposing does not subordinate any barony to another. I am proposing shared intelligence and coordinated timing, not unified command. Please confirm Lord Merrick's attendance at the meeting. He held the conference on the 1st of September, 12 days before the Royal Commission's first session. He held it at the Ashford Barony's main house, which was the right location for 2 reasons. First, the Ashford Barony was central to the 5 Compact members' holdings, which reduced the travel burden roughly evenly. Second, the Ashford Barony was his, and there were things you communicated by where you held a meeting that you could not communicate as efficiently by saying them. All 5 Compact Lords or their designated representatives arrived by the evening of the 31st of August. Lord Brennan came himself, with 2 garrison captains. Lord Ketterly came himself, with his head of household and an advisor who was introduced as a trade specialist, but who asked questions that suggested a legal background. Lord Aldenvane came himself, and the 3 garrison captains he had mentioned in his letter, and his son, who appeared to be there to observe. Lord Merrick sent his eldest daughter as his representative, Lady Merrick, 30 years old, who had a specific quality of attention that Kael registered immediately as the attention of someone who had been briefed carefully and had done additional preparation beyond the briefing. House Ashford, Aldrich at the table and Kael presenting. Gareth stood at the back of the room. He had dressed in the non-specific way that made him look like a capable frontier soldier rather than what he was. He did not sit. He watched. The presentation took 2 hours. He showed them the raid data, all of it, compact sourced and torrent sourced, and the 2 items from Seraphine's capital channel that he could share without compromising the channel. He walked through the coordination hypothesis and the evidence that supported it, the 4-hour simultaneous window, the split garrison response pattern, the supply depot targeting that required knowledge of the garrison's supply structure. He told them what he thought the larger operation was preparing for, which was honest about its speculative character and specific about the evidence that informed the speculation. Lord Aldenvane's garrison captains asked questions. Good questions, the questions of people who worked at the frontier level and recognized specific details in the data that confirmed what they had been seeing in their own sectors without having a frame for it. He answered each question directly, with the data that supported the answer or with an explicit acknowledgement when the data was insufficient. After the data, the capability disclosure. He stated it in the same conversational register he had used for everything else, which was a choice. A different person might have staged it, might have built toward it for effect. He said it the way he said things that were simply true. My aura capability is gold level. This has not been publicly known until this week. I am telling you now because the coordination proposal requires you to know, and because the frontier's current situation makes this the right moment for the disclosure. Lord Aldenvane said, not unkindly, you're 16. He said, yes. Lord Aldenvane looked at the garrison captains next to him. He said, can he fight? The eldest garrison captain, a man who had been at the frontier for 40 years, looked at Gareth at the back of the room. He said, who's the man at the back? Gareth said, his trainer. The garrison captain looked at Gareth for a moment with the specific look of someone who had trained a great deal and could read that register in another person's bearing. He said, how long? Gareth said, 8 years. The garrison captain turned back to Lord Aldenvane and said, if he's had 8 years of serious training and just confirmed gold, he can fight. Lord Aldenvane was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the coordination proposal. Show me the structure. He showed them the structure. He was not proposing unified command. He was proposing shared intelligence, a standardized weekly reporting format that pulled what each barony's garrison knew about activity in their sector and coordinated timing for defensive responses. When a coordinated raid was detected in advance, the response would be coordinated. The barony with primary threat would receive support from 2 adjacent baronies on a rotation, which meant each lord's garrison could contribute support without being depleted. The gold-level practitioner, him, would position based on the threat assessment rather than being tied to a single barony's defense, which multiplied the effective capability of the coordination disproportionately. Lady Merrick said, the critical path is intelligence quality. If the reporting isn't accurate and current, the timing breaks down. He said, yes. The compact's existing communication protocol handles the currency requirement. The accuracy requirement depends on each garrison captain reporting what they actually know rather than what they want the other lords to know. I am asking for genuine reporting. Lord Brennan said, we've been genuine for 3 years. He said, you have. I'm not implying otherwise. I'm stating the requirement so it's on the table before we agree to the structure, because the structure only works if it's met. Lord Ketterley said, the royal sanction question. He said, the charter provision covers coordinated emergency defensive action without prior sanction when the timeline for sanction is not compatible with the threat. The Royal Commission receives notification within 10 days of the action beginning. The provision was written to cover exactly this situation. Lord Ketterley's advisor said, who wrote the charter provision? He said, I did. There was a brief silence. Lord Aldenvane said, of course you did. He said it not with hostility, with the specific dry quality of someone who had been fitting pieces together as the meeting progressed and had arrived at a picture that was somewhat larger than he had expected when he left his holding 4 days ago. Lady Merrick said, my father's question is whether this coordination commits his barony to anything beyond the immediate defensive structure. He said, it commits your barony to sharing accurate garrison intelligence and to contributing 2 days of garrison support per rotation cycle. It does not commit House Merrick to any position regarding the capital's response, the Templar deployment, or any subsequent royal decisions about the frontier. The coordination is military and operational, not political. Lady Merrick looked at him steadily. She said, "My father will commit to the structure." Lord Brennan said, "So will I." Lord Ketterly, after a pause, "Ketterly is in." Lord Aldenvane looked at his garrison captains, who were not objecting. He said, "3 conditions. The reporting goes through my garrison captain as well as directly to the pool. The rotation schedule is recalibrated if the threat pattern changes before my garrison is committed." And he paused. "I want to see the gold capability directly before we're actually in contact with the enemy." He said, "I'll arrange a demonstration before the month is out." Lord Aldenvane said, "Good." A pause. "All right. Aldenvane is in." He looked around the table. The Eastern Frontier Compact had been an information-sharing agreement and an economic alliance. It had held for 3 years on those terms, which was longer than most people had expected when it formed, and the holding had produced the specific trust that came from an arrangement that worked as advertised. It was now a military alliance. He looked at the table, at the 5 lords or their representatives, at the garrison captains, at Aldrich on his left, at Gareth at the back of the room, watching with the particular attention of someone who was not watching for errors, but was watching the way a person watched something they had been waiting to see, and he thought about the road from here. The road from here was the intelligence pool operational within a week, the first rotation schedule drafted and distributed, the notification to the Royal Commission, the demonstration for Lord Aldenvane. And then, when the larger operation came, and it was coming, he was now certain of this. The data was sufficient, the coordinated response. He said, "Thank you for making the trip. I'll have the first intelligence pool report distributed within 10 days. The formal notification to the Commission goes tomorrow." He said it in the way he closed things that had been decided and were now operational, directly, without drama, treating the agreement as the beginning of the work rather than the end of the meeting. The meeting ended. The lords arranged their departures. Aldrich found him at the table when the room had cleared, looking at the pooled raid data. His father put his hand on his shoulder briefly, in the way he had been doing since the graduation, the specific, brief gesture that said something his father did not have the vocabulary for and did not need to translate. Kael said, "We start tomorrow." Aldrich said, "Yes." They did. The intelligence pool's first full cycle ran for 10 days before the pattern became legible enough to act on. He had been tracking it himself from the first report. The standardized weekly format he had drafted was designed to make comparison across baronies straightforward, which meant that looking at the pool's incoming reports was a different experience from looking at individual garrison reports, where each lord had used their own notation and emphasis and had not been thinking about what their data looked like in relation to anyone else's. The pool's format stripped the individual notation and produced something closer to a map. On the 11th day, looking at the map, he saw it. The raids over the past 3 weeks had not been random across the frontier's coverage area. They had been concentrated in 3 sectors: Brennan's south-facing sector, Ketterly's eastern section, and a third area that bridged the gap between them, which was an area that neither barony had strong garrison coverage of, and which appeared in neither barony's reporting as a primary concern, only as peripheral notation. The third area was the gap. It had been targeted lightly in the first phase, lightly enough that it hadn't registered as a primary threat, but the light targeting had been systematic, probing, not raiding, the specific behavior of a force assessing a weak point rather than exploiting it. He wrote to all 5 compact lords on the 12th day. He wrote, "The next attack will concentrate at the coverage gap between Brennan and Ketterly. The current data suggests this will occur within 8 to 14 days. I am recommending a pre-positioned response. 1 additional garrison contingent from Aldenvane and Ashford rotated into the gap coverage zone on the 9th day of this period, with Brennan and Ketterly maintaining their current garrison deployment to prevent pattern disruption. I will be positioned in the gap zone from day 7. He also wrote, in the same letter, "I have notified the Royal Commission per charter provision. The Commission's first session is tomorrow. I expect the Commission to receive the notification and take no immediate action. I want the Compact's lords to understand that the coordinated response I am describing is the Frontier's response, not a response waiting for the Commission's authorization. 3 lords confirmed within 2 days. Lord Aldenvane took an additional day. He had spoken to his garrison captain, who had reviewed the data and agreed with the attack gap analysis, and confirmed on the 4th day. Lady Merrick confirmed on behalf of her father on the 5th day, with a note in her own hand that said, "The analysis is correct." My father asks that you keep him informed by the daily summary rather than the weekly pool for the duration of the active period. He arranged the daily summary for Lord Merrick. He spent the days before the 7th in Gareth's training sessions, harder sessions than anything they had done before Gareth removed the limiters. The specific kind of training that was oriented not toward development, but toward consolidating what had already developed. Gareth drilled him in the specific applications of the expanded spatial awareness, how to use it in open terrain versus constrained terrain, how to maintain it at full resolution during the physical demands of combat, the specific ways that diamond-level combat worked and the ways that gold with an atypically large sensing radius would interact with that, which was something Gareth had worked through himself rather than drawing on standard training protocol. Gareth said, on the 5th day, "The thing you're going to want to do is use the awareness to avoid contact. Because you can." He said, "That's not the right use." Gareth said, "No. But you're going to want to. The awareness will show you what you need to do to not get hit, and your instinct will be to follow it." He thought about this. He said, "I'll want to redirect it toward anticipating the enemy's choice rather than avoiding my own exposure." Gareth said, "Yes." A pause. "I spent 6 months learning this when I first reached Diamond. The awareness wants to be protective. You have to teach it to be analytical." He said, "I'll keep that in mind." He positioned in the gap zone on the 7th day. He went alone, not because Gareth couldn't come, but because this was a reconnaissance position, not a combat position. And a single gold aura practitioner with a 200-meter radius spatial awareness in a constrained terrain gap was a more useful intelligence asset than any additional presence he could bring. The gap zone was rough terrain, low ridges, uneven ground, scattered old-growth forest that had never been cleared because no lord had wanted this particular stretch for farming. The terrain was the reason the gap existed, not a governance failure, but a practical reality. He spent 2 days in the gap zone, moving and watching. He did not see a raiding party. He saw evidence, the specific sign of a force that had been through this terrain recently and had been moving with discipline rather than urgency. 3 distinct trail sets, none of which matched the kind of wandering that characterized animals or hunters. He mapped the routes. He came back on the 9th day, and the Aldenvane and Ashford contingents moved into position. The attack came on the 12th day of the period. He was in the gap zone when the spatial awareness registered it, not a single force, 3 simultaneous movements from different approach vectors, the specific coordinated timing he had seen in the Brennan report's 4-hour window. He sent the signal to the contingents immediately. What followed was not a battle in the sense that would make narrative sense to someone who had not been inside it. It was 40 minutes of the specific disciplined work of soldiers who had been pre-positioned at the correct location and who knew where the attack was coming from before it arrived. The gap zone terrain worked for the defenders rather than the attackers because the defenders had spent 2 days learning the specific configuration of the ridges and the approaches, and the attackers had expected to find either no force or an underprepared garrison response. They found neither. The demon units, 12 fighters in each of 3 groups, a scale consistent with coordinated harassment rather than the larger operation he was still anticipating, pulled back after losing the element of surprise. The pullback was organized, not a rout, a controlled withdrawal. He tracked it through the expanded awareness for as far as the 200-meter radius permitted. He noted, "Organized withdrawal confirms command structure. The withdrawal pattern does not match any raiding group that doesn't have a specific extraction plan. They were told to pull back if the element of surprise was lost. Someone told them. No frontier garrison casualties. 2 minor injuries from the terrain rather than from contact." He sent the battle report to all 5 compact lords and to Seraphine and to the Royal Commission within the day. The Compact Lord's responses were different from each other in content and similar in register. Lord Brennan said, "The analysis was correct. I am glad we were ready." Lord Ketterley asked 3 questions about the withdrawal pattern. Lord Aldenvane said, "I owe you an apology. I expected the analysis to be wrong." Lady Merrick sent a note that said, "My father says the coordination worked." Lord Merrick was a man of few words. Lord Aldenvane came to the barony the following week. He came in person, which was not something Lord Aldenvane did lightly. He was 73 years old, and the journey from Aldenvane's holding to Ashford was a 2-day ride. He came because, as he said when he arrived and sat down at the main house table, "I wanted to see the thing that made the analysis correct with my own eyes." Kael showed him. He took Lord Aldenvane to the training yard and let the expanded spatial awareness run at its full resolution, and then he described to the Lord what he was seeing in the yard. The specific position of each member of the household staff currently working in the vicinity, the approach of Aldrich from the house's east entrance, the bird in the tree at the boundary fence. He described it without looking at any of these things directly. He described it the way you described something you knew directly rather than something you were inferring. Lord Aldenvane watched him for a long time. Then he said, "How far?" He said, 200 meters. Lord Aldenvane said, "Continuously?" He said, "Yes." Lord Aldenvane was quiet. He looked at the yard. He said, "In a battle, you would know where every unit was." He said, "If they were within 200 meters. In the gap zone terrain, that covers the full width of the relevant engagement area." Lord Aldenvane said, "And you're 16. He said, "Yes." Lord Aldenvane said, "I spent the first 30 years of governing this barony afraid that the frontier was going to be abandoned by the capital and we would be managing it alone." He paused. "I have not stopped being afraid of that, but I am beginning to understand that the management is real if we do it ourselves." He looked at Kael. "I want to know what you intend to build here. Not the immediate frontier defense. The structure beyond that." He looked at the Lord and thought about what he could say honestly and what he could say completely and the difference between the two. He said, "The Eastern Frontier Compact is a real structure. It works because the frontier lords have things in common that they've been managing separately, threat patterns, economic dependencies, political leverage that's been underused because it was never coordinated. The frontier has been underestimating its own position for a generation because the capital's attention has been elsewhere and no one has been counting the frontier's actual weight." A pause. "I intend to make the frontier's weight legible. To the capital, to the noble council, and to the lords themselves." Lord Aldenvane said, "To what end?" He said, "A frontier that governs itself adequately, defends itself adequately, and has enough standing that the capital cannot ignore it in its major decisions." He paused. "The kingdom needs the frontier. The frontier needs the kingdom. But the relationship has been structured as if only one of those things is true." Lord Aldenvane was quiet for a long time. He said, "My grandson will govern this barony after me." He looked at the yard. "If what you're describing is real, if the compact becomes what you seem to be building it toward, my grandson inherits a different barony than I did." He said, "Yes." Lord Aldenvane looked at him one more time with the assessment quality look he had been deploying since the conference, the look of someone recalibrating a significant understanding. He said, "Good." It was the same word Kael had used in the yard with Gareth. In a different voice, with a different weight, arriving at the same conclusion from a different direction. He said, "We have more to discuss about the winter rotation." Lord Aldenvane said, "I have 2 days." They went inside. The autumn was deepening around the barony, the first cooler nights, the specific quality of September light that was different from August and would be different again in October. The frontier lords had an alliance that was real and working. He had a capability that was public within the alliance and would become public beyond it in due course. He had a dead king's letter in his spatial ring and a living king's designation window closing in 4 months and a succession operation running in the capital without him and a partner who was running it correctly. He had what the barony was for. He went inside. There was more work to do.